The People's National Convention, PNC, is on its way to the court to challenge election results from the just-ended Talensi by-election. The party suspects foul play, explaining most of their strongholds recorded high number of rejected ballots as compared to other areas. The PNC says they were cheated because the Electoral Commission refused to recount the ballot papers in most of the places they requested for it. The elections were also characterized by pockets of violence and attacks by political parties on each other. Ahead of the elections, President Mahama said the Talensi elections is a dress rehearsal for the 2016 general elections, suggesting the outcome will impact on the 2016 general elections. So if this is anything to go by, then should we expect the same atmosphere and tone in the Talensi by-election come 2016 during the general elections? This is today's big story. With me, Aishiba. The National Democratic Congress NDC candidate VT Baba emerged winner in the Talensi by-elections with 10,366 votes, representing 42.31% of the total vote. The NPP's Wuni Thomas Dranap followed with 6,845 votes, representing 27.94%, while the PNC's Wumbego Namal Teng followed closely with 6,836, representing 27.90% of the total vote. It is the first elections held under Ghana's first female electoral commissioner, Charlotte Osei. The president says the outcome of the by-elections will have a telling effect on the 2016 elections. Now, the EC is being accused of rigging the elections, whilst many others say the elections were characterized by too much tension and violence. So how should we take all of these? We'll be gauging the mood of a political scientist and observers at the just-ended by-elections, and also get some answers from the PNC, who is set to seek redress in court. And the Electoral Commission will be beginning with the PNC's General Secretary, who is on the phone now. Good evening, Mr. Bernard Bona. Many thanks for your time. Well, whilst we try to get Bernard Bona, we also have a manager of the Center for Democratic Development, the Tamale branch, Mr. Paul Osei Kufo. He's also on the line to tell us more about the elections. Good evening. Many thanks for your time. Good evening, Mr. Osei Kufo. If you can hear me, let's look at the general conduct of the just-ended by-election in Talensi. Now, the EC is being accused of vote rigging by the PNC. What were your observations?
Listening to your viewers, could you mount the roaming and history observation? In the constituency, most part of the early the startup of the elections, in terms of the arrival of electoral officers and polling station logistics, they were quite, mostly they were on time, and the logistics were adequate and enough for the election. We didn't record any delays in the early parts of the day. In fact, the issue of violence basically occurred mostly at the polling stations. And it was in the afternoons that we heard some of these incidents, gunshots on the streets of Tongo. So generally, if you could look at the 74 polling stations that the elections were conducted, it was quite peaceful in most of the polling stations. The biometric voter registration machines were also very functional. In fact, at the East office, they showed us only 2 that broke down, and they quickly made a replacement. But even that, in most of the polling stations, they had an average of 2 biometric verification machines. Certainly, some few people the device failed to recognize them and they turned away, but they had to return a couple of times to give it further trial. So generally, we had a successful election with the exception of the pocket of violence that were recorded.
Well, with this pocket of violence, we had accusations and counter-accusations by the political parties. This one says the Zoka Boys attacked us. This one says it's the Bogatanga Bulldogs. This one says it's the invisible forces of the NPP and all of that. But what did your officials on the ground speak?
In fact, you know, the nature of Kodio observation is that we do roaming observation and then we also station some of the observers in the sample polling stations. So some of the incidents we don't directly witness them, but one that happened in front of MPP station, we were moving around and we happened to bounce into it. But the report that we gathered was that the Nizam patrol car was coming and it was blocked and the tires were shot at. But we couldn't get any authentic information from the police. We did our best to find out who actually were the people who shot at the car. And this has to do with the way and manner we manage our information systems during elections. And when some of these things happen, we expect that the police will quickly issue a statement. But we get the true picture and the real facts of the situation, because sometimes you speak to different personalities. When you are not directly at the incident, you seem to get conflicting positions.
Well, so earlier you said it was peaceful, but this is yes, Mr. Osei Kufo, you're still on air and we're hearing you clear. Earlier on you said it was generally peaceful, but this is an election which results is now going to be contested in court. So generally, would you say that it was a successful election?
You see, elections have so many phases. We have the deployment of observers. For example, if observers are not turned away at the setup of the polling station, how the polling stations were set up, were they friendly to people with disabilities and the elderly? For example, were logistics enough for support the election process? It doesn't interrupt the voting process at any point. Were ballot boxes snatched? Were incidents of violence recorded in most of the polling stations? Remember, we have 74 polling stations. These are all parts of the electoral process and system. So you don't isolate one and use it to analyze the entire the conduct of elections in Talensi.
Right.
So that's why I've taken my time to take you through all the processes.
Right.
As I said, from the morning regarding the arrival and setup to the midday, the place was very calm. It was in the afternoon that reports of the police using AK-47, top guns, and machetes. And we saw a lot of political parties being parading in pickups and the community, and the police mounting the checkpoint. And we saw that the environment became quite charged. It was boiling.
Right.
So even the incidents did not occur largely at the polling station.
Okay.
Some incidents where the Nizam patrol pictures were circulated, for example, happened in front of the polling station that was set up at the EC, the constituency office. Just one polling station around it. And it didn't even interrupt the voting process. So generally, we condemn the incidents of violence, and it has no place in the elections in any functional democracy. But we cannot use that alone to condemn the entire election. That I've walked you through all the phases. During the counting and declaration, most of the polling stations, the polling station agents accepted most of them and signed. It was at the counting and declaration that some issues were raised, and they have the right to also respond to correct it if they think they are not satisfied with it. If you look at the constituency summary sheet, for example, it's only the NDC that signed it. All the other parties, after the coalition, all the other parties, agents failed to sign it. It's telling you that to some extent they may not be happy with some issues of the coalition and other matters. But these we have to resort to the appropriate legal procedures to resolve them.
Let's look at recommendations. Were your observers able to draw some recommendations that can guide other elections of this nature?
Especially with the by-elections, I think we need to have a more detailed interrogation of the security architecture and planning and strategy that we use to conduct by-elections in Ghana, because it appears that most of the by-elections, the stakes and the interest and the suspicions and mistrust are high, to the extent that they are mostly not being able to manage very professionally, leading to destruction of property and attacks on people's lives and all that. Right. So first of all, we need to interrogate the type of security framework that we put in this by-election, and then use that to enhance security at polls in Ghana. Because we cannot continue to have these incidents occurring. We don't know when it will trigger and blow the country off.
Well, but let's look at Kodeo, your observers. I know you had about 30 observers on the ground. You yourself, what were some of the challenges your people faced? Because some people had their own share of the violence, the riots, gunshots, and here and there. You yourself, were you faced with some challenges?
None of the observers reported being attacked. None of the reporters also. In a few places, like, for example, Rinkogo Primary A or so, and where there were brief interruptions due to allegations of some political party youth invading the place and of allegations of money sharing and other things. Even that, it didn't cause too much distraction, but it interrupted the process, the voting process briefly. But in general, most of our observers reported a very peaceful and in most of the polling stations, with the exception of these few incidents of violence that I've already mentioned. We were not turned away in any of the polling stations as well. The EC conducted itself quite professional and collaborated with the media and the polling, the observation agents that were on the ground.
It has been said that the outcome of this elections in Talensi will impact on the 2016 elections. With what you saw on the ground, you think is the same thing we're going to be experiencing in 2016?
That is why I'm saying that it appears relatively, the by-elections, the stakes are too high. It's too much, because in national elections, we seem to have an average of 275 or so constituencies in Ghana.
Right.
And you don't have all forces and personalities and party officials being deployed in one constituency.
Right.
So that issue can be brought forth to the discussion, that the presence of all gurus and party officials and all the known vigilante associations connected to the various political parties, their presence in a relatively small area like Talensi, certainly, if not well managed, can lead to some of these reports that we are having. But as I said, we need to look at the security framework in general for managing elections, such that political parties do not continue to raise their private armies like what we've been hearing, the names we've been hearing, and the vigilante association. It's high time we find ways of handling and taming them so that it doesn't become a blot on our elections and democracy in Ghana.
Well, Mr. Osei, finally, let me gauge your mood. Looking at all these gurus, you're talking about all the big people and the tension that was brought to this small town called Talensi, or this small constituency called Talensi. You feel it contributed to the attacks and violence and all the aggressiveness we saw in this ended elections?
First of all, as I said, the stakes were high. This is the first by-election we are having after the Supreme Court case. And especially when both parties were trying to use this as a test in preparation for the 2016 elections. So they were playing the mind and the psychological game, so that however your performance will come out of this election, you can use that to make a good case for the 2016 election. So as I indicated, the stakes were high. And the deployment of all the personalities and the big names that we have in Ghana to the constituency also increased and boiled up the atmosphere. But most importantly, the violence are not caused by most of these big names that we hear.
Yeah.
They are the party vigilantes and youth associations that are connected to some of these parties that orchestrate some of these violence.
Right.
And as I did indicate, we have to do this situation. And I know CDD has issued a statement, and they are indicating that the police must interrogate, and CDD will be interested in following up what the interrogation and investigations will be, and which people will be prosecuted at the end of the day.
Well, Mr. Osei Kufo, he's a manager of CDD Tamale. Let me gauge your final words on this elections. Are there cues we could learn from these, from all the things that happened in Talensi?
Come again, please.
What cue should we take from this just ended election?
As we should work towards having an election that does not record these incidents or pockets of violence. No matter, as I mentioned, we have 74 polling stations. Elections were conducted very peacefully in most of these places. But because of the few incidents of violence and other reported intimidation, it has marked the entire elections. And people seem not to appreciate the good effort that the EC has put in. So going forward, we need, as I did indicate, we need to interrogate and have a broader multi-stakeholder consultative discussions on how to maintain electoral peace and avoid or do away with threats such as political party youth vigilantes that are interfering and interrupting the conduct of elections in Ghana. We need to have that discussion and find answers and let the security agencies be up and doing as well. And also one issue I want to bring up is about the rejected ballot.
Right. On which the PNC is going to court.
Still on the higher side. And it still requires further interrogation as to why we are having an average of about 3.5% of total votes cast as being rejected, about 880 or so, which is still on the higher side.
Right.
And especially in northern Ghana, the figures are very high compared to southern Ghana.
Right.
And we going forward in 2016 elections, these are some of the issues we need to interrogate and find answers to how we can reduce the number of rejected ballots in Ghana elections.
Well, Mr. Paul Osei Kufo, we're extremely grateful for your time on today's big story. We have been talking about the fallout of the Talensi by-election. We're looking at the issues that came up, the violence, attacks, and the fact that PNC is even accusing Electoral Commission of rigging the results of the elections. It's saying that the Electoral Commission refused to recount some of the areas that they requested that the EC recount, and so they're going to court. We're still trying to reach the General Secretary of the PNC, Bernard Mona, to speak on the issue. We want to find out whether they've already gone to court or what preparations they've made so far, and the basis on which they're accusing the Electoral Commission. We'll take a short break on today's big story. Welcome back to today's big story. We've been trying to reach the PNC's General Secretary Bernard Mona to speak more on the court issue, but we're finding some difficulties. We've also been trying to get the Electoral Commission for some responses. It's also being difficult. We'll be trying on the show to get a political scientist and get the angle of a political scientist also on the show. But right now we have our Upper East Regional Correspondent Albert Asare on the phone to tell us the mood in Talensi now, the once hot station yesterday. Good evening, Albert.
Good evening, Aisha.
Many thanks to you, Albert. Sorry for joining us. Yesterday, around this time, the whole place was, you were enjoying yourselves, though it was tough, but all attention was at Talensi. How is the place looking now, a day after a declaration was made?
Well, everything is gradually dying down. There were jubilations in parts of the constituency at the polling station, the collation center. Outside of it, there were jubilations. But the election took so long that a lot of people were tired and weary by the time they declared the results. So the jubilation wasn't that much yesterday, and today, it's been quiet, sort of. An occasional group of people will make noise on a motorbike or a vehicle passing by, and that has been the mood.
Have some arrests been made? Because yesterday we knew that the police assured us that they were going to arrest the perpetrators of those little violence we had here and there. Have they arrested any of those perpetrators?
Well, I spoke to the regional crime officer, Alex Asamoah Frimpong, earlier this afternoon, and he told me that they haven't arrested anybody yet because in most of the cases where the violence were perpetrated, the reports that come to them usually are that it was a group of people who did it. And, if it's a group of people, it's difficult to make arrests. So they will have to investigate and, be able to know if they can make arrests. But for now, no one has been arrested.
I know the NDC is still in a jubilant mood because, of course, their candidate, BT Baba, won the elections. But how are the other parties taking it in their constituency?
Well, for the other smaller parties, the NPP, we haven't heard from them yet. But the PNC, obviously, it's been in the media already. Yesterday, before the election results were declared, the PNC's General Secretary, Bernard Mona, raised a concern. And his concern was that in some of the PNC strongholds, in the polling stations at which the PNC won, there was also a consistent number of high number of rejected ballots for the PNC, which he thought, there was something fishy going on. And he was asking for a recount of the ballot papers. So that was how he took this matter up. They had to spend a lot of time addressing his concern. And at the end of the day, the results stayed the way they were. The EC declared the results. And then we are hearing now that the PNC wants to go to court over the result.
Well, many thanks to you, Albert. Sorry for the update from Talensi. That's our Upper East Region correspondent, Albert. Sorry. We've been trying to reach Bernard Mona, who agreed to speak to us earlier on the issues being raised by the PNC. The Electoral Commission also agreed to speak. All of them, their phones are off now. Now, political scientists Dr. Agridako and Dr. Ali Deseido were also finding difficulty in reaching all of them. Wanted to bring all of them into this discussion, but that's where we draw the curtains on today's big story. But we'll be back shortly with Joy News Interactive.